Welcome to Value Through Vulnerability, a podcast dedicated to putting the human back into humanity. This evening, I'm really excited to welcome Juan Castillo onto the podcast, who is an Agile Coach. Good evening there, Juan.
Good evening, Ari.
How are you?
Good. Here in Amsterdam.
Oh, you're in Amsterdam today. Oh, you're lucky. I've not been there in ages. How's things?
All good. Yes, taking care of things. Coming in is where I work partially, but I'm based in Lisbon.
Okay, great. We'll get into that shortly. So for anybody that's listening, so Juan, as was mentioned, is an Agile coach. And maybe, Juan, you can take a few minutes just to let the listeners know, who are you, what's your background, and what are you passionate about?
Yeah, well, I have a very interesting story to tell. So this goes back from the fact that I was born in the UK. I lived there for 10 years, and through that period, I got immersed into the English culture. And then in 1990, I went back to Chile because I'm Chilean. Both my parents are Chilean, and I lived 17 years there. And throughout that experience, I got really pushed to changing because I changed several different schools in several different cities.
Okay.
And then this culminating in me studying teaching. I'm a teacher by trade, which I am a teacher of math and physics for secondary school, which I did for like 2 or 3 years. And then at some point I decided to leave my country. And at the age of 27, I left to the UK. Okay. And then I explored my other passion, which was video games, which was a quite different turn of events. And I managed to be working in video games for 8 years, where I worked a significant amount of time, 5 years of those working for a company called Ubisoft.
Yep.
I really got a really good glimpse of how that industry works. But as well, I got in touch with software development, how all that comes together. And there are multiple roles there. But the role that touched me the most is how to take care of people. So closer to what is a producer in video games, the person that makes sure that everything's working. And there I got the first glimpse of what is Agile and Scrum. And then afterwards, I got out of the industry, the video game industry, and I went to pure software development. And there I started to work as a Scrum Master. And I got a really good feel of it in one organization, which was quite corporate. And I really learned there, how is it that things can be done in a way that, even though might be effective at a strategic level, it wasn't benefiting the people per se. So through that experience, then I went to another organization and worked for Scrum, as well as a Scrum Master. And in that organization, I developed the possibility to become a coach, because they had a habit of having conversations or one-to-ones by just walking around. So I took that and I had the opportunity to have very deep conversations with people. And I was very passionate about podcasts. I was reading quite a few books about psychology or behavioral psychology, like Thinking Fast and Slow. And all these different information motivated me to have a very special interest in how can I best support people in whatever difficulties that they might be going through. And it sparked something that I didn't know actually I had it clearly within me, but it developed through that. And after a year of doing that, I really got a good grasp of what it is to be a coach, and using Agile as a philosophy of work to help the development team to have a different perspective of how to deal with problems that they have at different levels. So that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, coaching in essence for a group of a product team. And I have expanded as well to other areas of the organization.
Wow, that's an absolutely fascinating background, Juan, for for me. So you've got this story, as you say, you were sort of brought up in the UK, went back to your sort of home country, as it were, of Chile, teacher, now into being a coach. That's a fascinating turn of events. What do you know? When did that sort of coach element come in? You know, have you always been passionate around the sort of human experience, the human condition anyway, sort of back to your teaching days, or?
Yeah, I think in essence, this curiosity was sparked by my father, who was always telling me to find the reason why things happened. And through that, because of my particular personality of being an extrovert, I had a tendency to like to talk to people. So with time, as I grew older, people have told me that I've always had an inclination, or had a tendency to ask people about how they were doing in their personal life. So I was doing it intuitively since a very young age. Even when I was working in the video game industry, I was doing that, but it wasn't anything to do with my role at all. Now, what happened is, when I grew more mature in my 30s, I started to see that there was more value in what I did, and I could maybe make it more meaningful. And I complemented my wealth of experience with more theory. Yeah. So like I said before, the book Thinking Fast and Slow really made me rethink what I thought about how I viewed myself and the world in general. And I started to question a lot of things about how things happen, and how easily we are manipulated or influenced by different mediums. And through that, I just built on top, and I listened to podcasts, other type of podcasts. One of them is Tangentially Speaking. Another one is the other one that I listen to, Waking Up. And they both have very contrasting perspective, and I like to hear opposite views of the same topic. So that made me more versatile to understanding issues from different perspectives.
Yeah, that really speaks to me, actually, Juan, because you know you've sort of touched on a really critical point of our time, isn't it, right now, which is around this sort of polarization of views. You know, without going too political on things on the podcast, I think your desire and your interest to truly understand two differing points of view around the same topic, I think that's really commendable, Juan. You know, is that something that you take into your coaching practice to some extent?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we as humans, and in my experience so far, we in essence are living contradiction. We have a lot of aspects of our life that we dwell in opposites. And what in essence our life is to find a center, some place that we can feel that we are balanced. And that is a constant battle that we have throughout life for different situations that we go through. So definitely is something that I do during my coaching, to bring an opposite perspective. Yes, whatever they saw from one point of view, I just go, but have you ever thought or seen it from this perspective? And if the person is open to listening and being challenged, it has very impactful results on the individual.
And have you got any sort of examples you can share of that? Have you got any sort of recent or sort of historic examples of where you've been able to sort of that extra sharing of views, or you know, that competing point of view has really helped someone become more aware, for example, or maybe grow to some extent?
So one of the major dilemmas in software development is that it's very easy to get sucked into autopilot with what their expertise, what expertise they have. So developers, they really need to focus in what they're doing at programming. So when doing so, they lose touch maybe of how is it to relate to people. So when they have difficulties in communication, they might see it kind of from a programmer point of view, So what I help them is to let them see a different depth of understanding that humans are more than what they just do, and they have a vast array of personal experience that they might be going through to have reacted or behave in a certain way, and that they tend to take for granted. So an example is, let's say a person came to work and had a bad day, and through a conversation that person reacted not in a constructive manner, and they react immediately saying that the person attacked them. Yeah, but they don't put themselves in the shoes of the other person. Now when you go to talk to that person as to why they had a bad day, they might have had a personal situation at home that they were not comfortable sharing, but it was influencing a lot that moment in time. And it might be more than just one day. It could be a few days, depending on the degree of how delicate that situation was. So giving people that sensibility that we are much more complex than employees that are hired to work is something that is more needed than we actually realize, because it's, like I said, it's very easy to go into autopilot when we start doing our routine or what we've been hired for, as I said before.
Yeah, no, that resonates a lot with me, Juan, actually. And I think if we look at, there's so much talk, isn't there, right now around the sort of rehumanization of work. And I think, you're really speaking really strongly to that, which is actually how do we truly understand the individual? We've all got our own reality, haven't we? Every one of those people, the developer, or whether it's a scrum master, you or me, we've all got our own reality on a particular situation in the moment. And I guess your job, it seems to me, is to try and help people make the best out of those moments to some extent.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, one of my key elements that I do my best to reinforce is that the only way that we can learn more about each other is creating relationships, some type of relationship. Now, it can be as in depth or as shallow as you want, but the more shallow you make it, the less connected you can be to the individual to be able to understand the great degree of a spectrum of behaviors that they might have in any given moment. So getting them to realize, look, there's something that I talk about and gets them to get them to think from a different perspective is, for example, the fact that we lose touch that we were hunter-gatherers for a very, very long time, and that we became an agriculture civilization in the last 10,000 years, and that is influencing us a lot in certain instinctive mechanisms that we have as humans. And given that little insight as to how it affects us, what we were, how we became what we are today, the accelerated pace as how things are changing that we don't notice. Many times we just lose track of the fact of how fast technology has advanced, how different relationships have become, how crazy it is that people are consistently moving to different countries to live, and they're far away from their families and loved ones, that we lose track of how strenuous it is to live in this society today. So giving them that perspective, I do my best to get them to be less hard on themselves about how the difficulties that they need to confront in normal day-to-day interactions.
Oh, that's so powerful, Juan. To have someone in, for the work you're doing is so important to me, because, it sounds to me a lot of your time is really spent on, excuse the cliche for a moment, but really allowing the people you work with to bring their whole self, not to have to leave that personal health, that personal self at home once they go in to do the job they're paid to do.
Yeah, of course. I mean, another element that I as well, in theory, is the dream to reach. In practice, is quite hard to obtain. Is embrace the uniqueness and individuality of every person in the organization or in a company. Like, you embrace the fact that we are very, very different, and that diversity is what brings richness to the creativity that we might bring together as a group. And it's challenging for sure, but that's the beauty of life, the challenges that we confront. The fact of somebody moving from a very far away country to a completely different continent, to a culture, is a challenging endeavor. You have to be very brave to do that. But sometimes we take it for granted. We go, no, a lot of people do that, but not really. So embracing that we all come from a unique background and giving us space in an organization to be ourselves is something that I would say most people will agree with, but in practice it's quite challenging to do.
Yeah, I think this speaks a lot, and part of the reason for this podcast is around inclusion. How do you actually get that diversity of thought? And I've seen a number of talks, and myself on podcasts, one quite recently, around you cannot actually get that diversity of thought until you first include everyone. Does that resonate with you? Is that a fair comment to you, or do you challenge that?
No, without a doubt. I mean, you have to have a diversity of thought. So that means having an open mind to seeing opposing views. And through that, once that matures enough, you can start nurturing, or it will manifest from that inclusion, because there will be a more respect towards each other's differences. It's the same idea of, you want to have, at a deeper level, you want to have this diversity work well. Well, before that, you need that to create an environment of trust. And trust is not something you just gain by giving somebody a job title, or just telling them that, all right, you need to trust this person because that's what he's there for. No, it's something you nurture, it's cultivated, and it's created through building relationships with one another. So you can go, all right, I know where this person comes from. I can feel comfortable with who he is. I can then be more myself and trust that person for a diverse amount of topics or situations.
That's interesting, actually. So would you mind sharing an example for you personally, if you don't mind, Juan? Could you give an example of some point in your life when either you've felt complete trust in someone, or maybe you've completely mistrusted someone? You don't have to name names. I'm just wondering an example. Just can you bringing your statement to life around trust?
In general, and I think I might be naive in a way, is that by default I have a tendency to trust. So my way of being is to be there, open to the moment. So when I meet somebody new, I just am there to explore what possibilities there are without judgment. So I think with time, what's happened is that I've acquired a better sense of how to calibrate better. When is it that I can tell that I can really trust somebody with different subjects or not? So it's my natural being to be trusting. So is something that I've done since a very young age. And for that reason, I don't have, like, let's say, a clear example of how I manifest it, because it just comes naturally. What I can say is that what I have discovered is how it affects people, the fact that the way how I am. So not so long ago, I was having a one-to-one, and I asked this colleague of mine, friend even, what is it that he could feel so comfortable with me, but he struggled to do it with others? And the answer was, you just shared many things with me without asking anything in exchange. That gave me the possibility to do the same towards me.
Yeah, lovely.
So I manifested trust for the person to feel trust in themselves and do it towards the other person.
This is one. You know what I love about what you just described, and this happens too often with my podcast guests. Juan, my little hairs on the end of my head go on end, because you just described beautifully. You know, you talk about this default almost level of trust that you exude just in your being. But what you also spoke about there to me, which I can really resonate with, is that example you gave of that one-to-one. You in essence demonstrated vulnerability. You actually gave something of yourself to that person without them asking. So yes, it built trust, but you also demonstrated vulnerability to some extent as well.
Definitely, without a doubt. I mean, to be trusting, in essence, means to be vulnerable. You are just showing yourself without having any type of armor or protection. Now, as you grow older, you learn how to be more sensitive to when and who. But in general, yes, you are in a very, very vulnerable state to be able to be trusting towards others and non-judgmental.
Powerful. And I'm trying to think back to this trust equation. I'm not sure if you've come across that, but I remember Helen Amery mentioned this in our first podcast as well, and it's something I've researched recently. Is the trust equation, part of that is actually vulnerability. So this is all stacking up really nicely, actually. So I need to research that a bit more. So if we look at what you're talking about here around the trust, being vulnerable, being open, one-to-ones, how much do you see, or how often do you see these traits of the true human experience around vulnerability, trust, awareness, etc.? Where do you see that sitting in the engagements that you have within your your work organization or your client organizations? Do you see this being role model right throughout? Is it more difficult at the top, which is something that I see within organizations? How do you see these particular aspects of your coaching work showing up?
So, in essence, all this that I say is something that is important to put in practice. I mean, there's experience is what gives you the true understanding and application of it. So my whole purpose at the beginning was to be as a bigger role model for them to understand what it is to be trusting and vulnerable and sharing, and see how I could just share as much of my experience and knowledge with them to see if that could give them a different way of viewing things. So the people that have interacted with me for a significant amount of time through this coaching practice, one-to-ones, they have been the beneficiaries of learning what this means, and they have done it as well with their colleagues and friends. We are friends as well. So unfortunately, if that is not a practice that you do, and you are not constantly reminded about what that means, it's very unlikely that you will learn about it. So in general, there is a stronger reception to the younger generation and the people that are still building their careers versus the people that maybe are more senior in experience or and in age, that maybe because of past experiences or things that they lived that maybe were not the most pleasant, are more reluctant to participate in such a dialogue. Mm. And I just see it as a way of them manifesting that because of hierarchical structures, there's a tendency to think that they are the sole carriers of all the responsibility and they need to carry it on their shoulders. And because of that, there's kind of a belief that they need to have as well all the solutions. So that is my take in essence of how I see the big difference. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no exceptions to the rule, but in general, that's the tendency that happens.
Yeah, I see that myself as well. And I think what's interesting, from a number of conversations I've had recently, is that you've got, there's always historically, or certainly looking at the research that I've looked at, there's been historically a focus on executive coaching, Juan. Whereas what you're doing, which I really like, is a much more inclusive approach. I'm sensing that the services you offer, the support you offer, is very much on an open, inclusive basis for anyone that wants it. Is that a fair comment, or is that something you would challenge?
Yeah, that's how I approached it, for sure. Like, it's something that I say quite often. You don't make anybody do anything. Yeah, you cannot tell people it doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work for long term. And you might tell them, clean, your desk, but if it's not something that they intrinsically believe or understand the value, they will probably forget about it after a while. So it's important that whoever wants to embrace a change or reevaluate their perspective is something that they really want and believe, or at least they have they are brave enough, the courage to be able to be put in that place. And by experiencing that interaction and then putting it in practice with their peers, it's where they start to role model each other. They see the benefits of behaving in one way or another. So definitely the way that you encourage people is by being the best version of yourself as possible. And then through that, hopefully they see the value of how those interactions actually create a constructive environment and flourish.
I like this, and you're talking about role modeling here, Juan, as well, which absolutely is so important. What I also find interesting, and I hope the listeners are picking up on this, we're sort of a nice way into this discussion this evening. We have not discussed a metric anywhere. We're not talking about ROI. We're not talking about profitability. We're talking about purely the inputs, which is the human experience. I find that really interesting to reflect on, Juan.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so easy to go to the tangible and forget that the human condition or the human way of how we are in terms of feelings is so untangible. We see the effects on it, of the side effects of what can happen. But unless you experience it, there's no way of you even naming it. I mean, you need to learn how to trust to know what trust is. Simple. I mean, there's no other way. That there's no book or no course that will say, you know, this is trust. You see it, you can touch it. It doesn't work that way. You need to live it. So unfortunately, these aspects of us humans, we need to give it more time to experience it with one another, which sometimes is very scary, especially if you have lived a life of taking care of yourself, that maybe you don't want to get hurt or disappointed. Maybe your expectations are higher one of each other. Any of these ways of being which don't permit you to grasp the full complexity of the human emotion, really limits the possibility of you experiencing it fully.
Do you know something, Juan? I'm loving this chat because, you know, I can't remember the last time I saw a job specification saying must be trustworthy or must be a really nice human being. It's always must have Excel, 5 years experience, must fit in this box. Do you know what I mean? It's quite fascinating.
We are still carrying the legacy of the industrial age. So even with all these new ways of working, like Agile and all these methodologies that have appeared in the last 20 years or so, there's a lot of industrial age mentality and structure and processes that we carry on as, well, we were taught this in the past, let's keep on doing it now. And they have not been able to add these elements which have developed more recently than ever. You know? Or the empowerment of women, the fact that we are much more aware of how biased men are to many, to how we can appreciate what women can bring, and really acknowledge that, and be constantly reminded of that. And we very easily get sucked into our cultural and social classical behaviors. But now the knowledge is there, the information is there, the awareness can be brought up. And we are struggling to really integrate that fast enough. And it's understandable because it's too much change. It's way too much change. So there's a lot of effort needed to be done to create this sense of awareness of the complexity of what humans are and how we can bring it to the workplace in an effective and caring manner.
If I just go back to what you just said there, I'm interested to explore that a bit more with you, Juan. When you say there's too much change, what does that mean for you?
Well, there's so many angles that you can pick this up from. But so let's say just from the one that I think is most popular in tech. The changes, think about, you know, how far in the past smartphones have existed and the different specialties that came from them. So now you have iOS developers, Android developers. Now soon there's going to be a new platform. So people that work with apps are going to have to relearn ways of how they work. Then we have as well all this revolution that is coming, and it's going to be quite strong, which is AI, so machine learning. And that is bringing a whole different breed of developers as well that are all applying this technology like crazy in all areas of life, and we're just experimenting, and really amazing things happen, and people are getting triggered by this because they say, oh, but that sounds so interesting, so I want to go and learn AI now, and I want to see what I can do there, and it looks like I can have even a bigger impact. So in a generation already, people that maybe started learning about one subject, after 10 years, give or take, they might have to, or not even have to, they might get interested in moving to a different area of expertise, which really demands reevaluating how they sit in the organization, what tech they might use. So just at that aspect, professionally, there's a lot of change. Now, let's say socially, all these movements that have appeared, or let's say the Me Too movement, they're really reaching out and saying, we should have more awareness of how we are treating each other. And maybe sometimes it gets out of hand, but the point is people have, because of technology, again, have been pushed to be more empowered to really voice their concerns, not necessarily always effectively, and not acted on in the most constructive manner, but the whole motivation is there to really spark an awareness of things that we've been missing maybe for centuries. And now they're all coming up all at one go, and people are supposed to somehow make sense of it all. And to make sense of such a complex environment where 7 billion human beings. So the amount of ideas and change and research and development that is happening is just ridiculous. So you can see it from all types of angles and levels, and it gets overwhelming, for sure.
No, I think it's a really fair point. I guess we see both opportunities as well, don't we? As well as the sort of the struggle to deal with change. Because I think, that awareness, as you say, Juan, of these movements, Black Lives Matter, March for Our Lives, all of the, you and I would not have connected as easy as we did. I think by the Corporate Rebels Slack group a year or so ago.
Exactly.
Without the tech, we just wouldn't have done that. So there's so much good coming out of it. But I get your point that how do you? I love your phrase. How do you make sense of it all? How do you do that from a sort of coaching point of view as Juan? How do you help the people you work with make sense of what's going on within your sort of coaching sort of practice?
Well, one of the key takeaways that I've learned for myself, and I do my best to share it with others, is that as overwhelming as that it might be, what is important is to focus on the things that you do have control. Focus on the things that you can manage. So that means yourself, how you interact with people, what you're dedicating time to, what you're thinking about, how you take care of yourself intellectually, physically, spiritually. So the way that I do my best to give them to make sense is, one, that they make sure that they are taking care of these elements that they can grasp and touch. And second, based on that premise, develop more understanding of these elements. So you interact with people, then learn more about how people function. What is it that we are biased to, or we lose track? What are our blind spots? As well, we live in a society that's quite shallow nowadays. Many of the social media aspects, even though a lot is used for learning more and having a more depth conversation about topics, but a big chunk of it is used for just superficial aspects. So making them aware that having these deep conversations in real time with each other is very beneficial to have a better understanding of the world as well, not only about that individual, because that comes with a big chunk of experience. And then just giving them more information to get them to think about how life came to be, so that instead of feeling so bad that maybe something doesn't work, or they might they failed at doing something, they are less critical about themselves, and they can relax and say, well, you make mistakes, but you can amend them. Just pay more attention to how these circumstances arise by being more informed of what mechanisms created that. So that's more or less how I I get people to feel more at ease with the hectic nature of society.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpick in there for me though, Juan, because I think, I'm getting that, that element of, that self-care element. That's something we talk about every Tuesday, actually. There's one coming up tonight at 2000 GMT, Self-Care Weekly is a Twitter chat we run. You have to look after yourself before you can help others. It's a really clear point. I'm also getting around your curiosity, and just, what's really jumping out to me, Juan, as we speak, and, it seems so obvious. One of the biggest assets and opportunities we have is the person sitting next to us, isn't it? Do we actually know them? Do we know their life story? Do we know their background? Do we know where they can help us, how we can help them? I can say honestly, in every work organization I've worked in the last 20 years, I know people better from a 10-minute Zoom chat who I've never met before over, someone I've met on Twitter, than often people I've worked with for over a decade. Because for some reason, once you're sitting next to them in the work organization, without someone like you opening that door, we just come in 9 till 5. We know as much on the surface as we need to know, and then we go home. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Man, and it's things that are just in front of your eyes. I mean, there's a reason that the complexity in technology is demanding such a diverse group of people to work together, because it's that hard to do this, and we work better by being diverse and together. So why not apply it in how you can be better as an individual? And you learn more by spending time and talking about things that matter with somebody else, not just listening to your own thoughts all the time. I mean, if you want to have a different perspective, you can't keep on asking yourself. You need to ask other people to give you a different perspective and say, hey, I saw that you did this, or look, this is my experience. How does that reflect in you? What is your opinion about that? So it's just, I find it very surprising sometimes that we lose touch of the fact that by sharing these experience together, which we do at work, why don't we do it at different levels, which is as important for us to learn from each other and to grow. Yeah, we as humans, we live one experience. The only way that we live other experiences is by talking with other people. That's why we listen to podcasts. That's why we read books. We can't have 100 lives. We just have one life. So how to create a wealth of wisdom by interacting more with people? But to be able to do it, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be trusting, and as well open to the idea that they might have a completely opposite point of view from yours. And if that's the case, be open to the possibility that maybe there's some truth or something that you completely missed. And that's fine.
Lovely. Yeah, like you say, it's so hard, but yet so obvious. And I guess that's why for the last, as you say, the Industrial Revolution, when we've been able to focus on ROI and metrics and the stuff that's hard, and I bat on about this a lot, Juan, people talk about the soft skills of interpersonal curiosity. I don't know what you think, but I think they're far harder to actually engender in people around the sort of, curiosity, problem solving, creative thinking. And I think that's why we've not focused on them for the last 50, 100 years, because it is so hard to actually engender a culture where people actually are allowed to be themselves and to actually be vulnerable and to learn. And it takes time, Juan. You've mentioned that a few times in our chat. It takes time to do that. Do you feel organizations are giving people the time to spend time on human development and interaction and problem solving and diversity?
No, definitely not. I mean, you can tell that and it's not entirely the fault of the organization in itself. It has to do with how society and the economical system is built up. It's about profit, it's about being productive, it's staying alive and not succumb to not being able to function anymore as an organization due to lack of resources, maybe. And that pressure is felt. And the people at the top, many times, they just feel that pressure and they just act on that. So they're in a rush to stay relevant, but they lose touch that humans demand a different set of motivations and a space for creativity is not built on those type of principles which we see outside in the real world. So definitely there isn't given enough time to be able to learn from each other and just have a moment to stop, just stop, don't work. Let's talk about how things are going. Or I know you arrive at work and maybe you see a colleague who potentially could be your friend, and you could see that maybe his expression might be a little bit sad and down. It's not very common that people go up to that person and go, "Hey, are you feeling all right? You want to go out for a chat?" Just giving yourself that moment to care for somebody else. That is not something that comes naturally. Or basic things like when you come into work, say good morning, shake each other's hand, or grab their shoulder. Just connect with people, which is something so basic. But we get into the grind of being in an autopilot mode, just sit at our desk, and maybe say a quiet good morning, but you just focus on getting things done. And it's super evident when you, especially in all the organizations that I've been, you see it quite often in different degrees.
Yeah, and I've seen it a lot as well. But do you know something though, on a sort of more, that is what we're dealing with. Everyone's talking about the same challenges within the world of work, and you're clearly doing what you can within your practice, Juan, to shift that, which is brilliant. What's inspiring you the most right now? What are you listening to, reading? Who are you engaging with? What's inspiring you as Juan the most right now?
Yeah, well, one source of inspiration, without a doubt, is podcasts. I mean, I will say again, and I'm very happy to listening quite often. Is tangentially speaking, is the wealth of variety of topics that are brought in there of very, very clever and passionate people is incredible. So I get inspired every day by listening to some topics that I never heard before, and then I do research about them. Another one, and it's more from that podcast is more of a emotional standpoint. Really gets in depth of learning who they are. Something like the conversation that we just had now, that we're having now. Sorry. And the other side is Waking Up, that as well has a very big variety, but from a completely different perspective, which is more logic, structured, which as well is interesting because it brings these topics structured in a way that is tangible, and practical in application. So it's valued as well. So I complement these ideas and see what I can come up with that is my own. Now, books that I'm reading, really, I have a very big variety of different types of books. And let's say the latest book that I'm reading is from Esther Perel, and it's called Mating in Captivity. And it has such a good take on understanding how these deep relationships that we have with partners, how much we are affected by the current reality of society and how much we lose touch of that. It's kind of a very similar analogy of what happens in the workplace, how we lose touch of the fact that work we think is everything, and we don't understand that there's humans involved, and there's a lot of depth of how we are reacting to different circumstances. This book is the same, but with relationships, intimate relationships, and fascinating. So I have a tendency to jump to different books, different topics, to just broaden my understanding of people and the current state of affairs that we're in the world, and see if I can join the dots.
You can hear the curiosity in your brain ticking, Juan, as you explain that. It's really impressive. You always inspire me when we speak, to be fair. So thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to put a little recommendation in for myself. So a book that I read back in February or March was Nilofer Merchant. I don't know if you've come across her, Juan. So she wrote a book called Onlyness. She used to work for Apple some years ago, and she talks about every person on this planet has got a unique view of the world that only they can see, and that's their opportunity to connect. Very much what you've spoken about on this podcast. You know, how do you find co-denters, people that can challenge you but also help you grow towards a sort of a mutually beneficial end, for example. So mine being around this podcast, meeting great people like you, helping organizations and people be more vulnerable, be more aware, be more inclusive is really my big passion. And, you know, that's something that's driven me heavily over the last six months, is that particular book, Onlyness by Nilofer Merchant. And that's certainly one I can recommend.
I'll pick it up then. I have another book that just came to mind. Is a book called Accelerate.
Okay.
And that is a 4-year research that they did in organization of what makes high-performing team flourish, and the connection between high-performing teams in software development. There's a direct, actually, prediction on how healthy the organization is. Wow. Which is a very powerful book as well, and it's got a lot of data and statistics to prove it.
That sounds cool. My God, I've just checked the time for it. I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah.
It's up to about an hour now, so but maybe we should start to wrap up. How can people get hold of you, Juan? If people want to just reach out, have conversations with you, network with you, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Well, I'm in the corporate rebel Slack channel. That's a way that you can find me. Juan Castillo is how my name is there. LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's about it. I'm not really social media person, to be honest. I try to not be influenced so much by the media. I try to pick and choose what I really want to learn and read. You can reach out to my email address if you want. I can give my email address.
Great, that's perfect. Do you mind just advise listeners what that is, Juan?
It's juan.castillo79@hotmail.com.
Brilliant. And I'll put all of your contact details in the show notes anyway, Juan, as well.
Sure.
So
sure.
No, it's absolutely awesome. And I'd really like to get you back on again, because I know there's going to be plenty more for you and I to discuss as time moves forward. Is there any other sort of parting comment? Is there anything particularly you'd like to leave with the listeners? Or
no, thank you for the opportunity to being in your podcast. I really appreciate it. It's a first for me. I'm really curious as the reaction of what I say, and I welcome all the feedback possible to see if anything that's I've said makes sense or not, because that's what I want to do, constantly just learn how to be a better version of myself. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Gary.
No, brilliant. No, thanks for joining me. And you've role modeled all through the key areas of this podcast around vulnerability, self-awareness, and inclusion perfectly, Juan. So thanks a lot for joining the podcast, and let's speak again soon. Yeah.
No, thank you, Gary.
Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
You too.
Bye.
Take care. See ya. Bye.